Humans have existed for over 2.5 million years, but we only started writing things down about 5 millennia ago. That leaves roughly 99% of our history completely undocumented. Modern faiths are built almost entirely on texts. We have the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, millions of words detailing exactly what people believe and why. But when we look back at our earliest ancestors to understand the origins of faith, we hit a wall of absolute silence. Early historians assumed this silence meant early hominins, like Homo erectus, were biologically incapable of spiritual thought. They overlooked physical patterns, like skulls found in Java and China that show signs of ritual tampering, suggesting a sense of moral responsibility and ceremonial behavior was stirring long before we had the words to describe it. Modern science suggests the capacity for religion is actually a byproduct of our brain's evolution. To find the moment that capacity activated, we have to look past the lack of text and treat physical artifacts as a window into the ancient mind. To understand the birth of belief, we have to analyze 3 distinct layers of evidence: the way they treated their dead, the images they painted, and the monuments they built. Our investigation starts in the Middle Paleolithic, roughly 150,000 years ago. This is when we find the first undisputed evidence of homins doing something entirely impractical with their dead: burying them. When excavating these Neanderthal graves, researchers do not find haphazard piles of remains. The skeletons are deliberately arranged, positioned with a physical care that requires time, effort, and intention. Alongside these carefully placed bones, archaeologists frequently find traces of red ochre, a natural clay pigment. To many anthropologists, decorating the dead with this coloring suggests a belief in the afterlife, preparing the deceased for a spiritual passage. Other experts interpret the evidence more conservatively. They suggest Neanderthal culture was incredibly stable, surviving hundreds of thousands of years through strict, unchanging routine. In this view, burial wasn't necessarily spiritual. It was a social bonding ritual designed to maintain tribal order. While Neanderthals practiced these rites, the leap to true, complex religion required a trait called cognitive flexibility. This ability to imagine and adapt to abstract concepts only fully matured with the brain of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens. Whether preparing a soul for the next world or simply reinforcing tribal bonds, these grave sites show a species interacting with death as a symbol. The buried bones represent the first biological sparks of a searching mind. Roughly 50,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic, the evidence shifts from what we did with our bodies to what we did with our imaginations. Researchers look at the anatomical exaggerations and animal-human hybrids in these paintings and propose a narrow psychological model. They argue these images are not simple sketches of nature, but recreations of hallucinations experienced during altered states of consciousness. These artists often painted in the most inaccessible corners of deep caves. If these images represent visionary experiences, it suggests a form of egalitarian shamanism, where spiritual leaders entered trances to map a spirit realm that was just as real to them as the physical world. This creative energy also produced thousands of small, handheld statuettes known as Venus figurines. Despite being separated by vast distances, they share remarkably consistent traits. Traits like realistic obesity, heavily exaggerated midsections, and blank or abstract faces. The prevailing theory is that these served as fertility charms, protecting women through the dangerous process of childbirth. However, because they are found in nearly every Upper Paleolithic site, they may have acted as a standardized visual language of spiritual power. Carving stone and painting deep underground required immense time and calories. By investing their resources into art, our ancestors proved they were no longer just surviving the physical world. They were designing a spiritual one. The Neolithic revolution changed everything. Around 12,000 years ago, agriculture anchored nomadic humans to specific plots of land, permanently restructuring how they lived and worshipped. Populations clustered into dense settlements like Çatalhöyük. Thousands of people lived in closely packed units, marking a transition from mobile, egalitarian bands into large, sedentary communities. Inside these homes, we find human remains buried under the floorboards, alongside clay idols. These artifacts point to intense domestic rituals and ancestor worship, a way for families to claim a spiritual right to the land they were now farming. Farming produced surplus food, which generated wealth, and that wealth created social inequality. The individual shaman was replaced by a spiritual aristocracy, elite priesthoods who claimed exclusive access to the gods to justify their power. This new hierarchy manifested in massive public works. Across Western Europe, the ruling elite coordinated the labor needed to build megalithic stone circles, moving rocks weighing several tons across hundreds of miles. These monuments were aligned with the solstices, acting as massive architectural calendars. By controlling the timing of the harvest through these solar alignments, religious leaders proved their status as mediators between the heavens and the earth. As human societies became anchored to the land and strictly hierarchical, our gods and rituals morphed specifically to sustain that new social order. By the Bronze and Iron Ages, the first written records began to appear. We enter proto-history, the narrow window where ancient artifacts finally align with the written archetypes of modern gods. We find elaborate, high-status burials that mirror the mythological figures we recognize today. The complex preservation and wrapping of the dead show that the transition from prehistoric silence to historical record was a gradual, visible process. These ancient practices still resonate. Modern Reconstructionist movements gather at these exact megaliths today, visually connecting ancient architecture with contemporary human practice in an attempt to reclaim lost traditions. This timeline shows that religion is not a sudden invention of civilization. It is the result of a 2.5 million year journey, stretching from the first ritualized tampering with early hominid skulls to the complex hierarchies of the Neolithic. These artifacts, the bones, the clay, the stones, are the foundational blueprints of the human mind. They prove that our search for answers predates our ability to write them down by millions of years.